Hey guys, I want to welcome you to the weekly Wednesday for the Financial Freedom newsletter, where every week, every Wednesday, we delve into something inspirational, motivational, something excerpt taken from the Financial Freedom weekly newsletter. Wherever you are, if you're listening on Spotify, on iTunes, Google, be sure to click the like, subscribe, share, comment. And without ado, let's get into the show. Welcome everybody to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, we talk about 4 different types of freedom: time, financial, location, health freedom. In that light, I'm always interviewing influencers, people doing things on the cutting edge, and sharing those insights with you. So today we have a special guest. His name is Scott Maderer, and he helps clients master their time, talent, and treasures so that they can live out their calling. So he's also the host of Inspired Stewardship. So today is going to be talking about productivity, time management, communication with DISC, which is going to be really interesting, and living out your best life. So Scott, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk to you and your listeners today.
Yeah. I'm excited to see what 2023. And so tell us more about yourself, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I was a school teacher for 16 years. I actually went to school to do medical research. I have a degree in biochemistry and a second degree in genetics. Worked in a lab, did research work, doing all of that stuff, and figured out that I hated it. So it turns out that research work involves a lot of going after money as opposed to actually doing research, which shocked me at the time. But grant writing turns out to be a full-time job. So I left that after a few years, went into school teaching, became a public school teacher, did that for 16 years. And then in the words of my students, I joined the dark side. I left teaching and worked in the assessment industry. Short answer, I wrote tests for a living. So I would do state-based testing, California, Maryland, Tennessee, all over. Became a road warrior, did a lot of contract work, a lot of on planes, got to see a lot of airports, a lot of hotel rooms, a lot of conference rooms. After 11 years, I'd kind of worked myself up to senior management there, highly compensated executive employee, all of that sort of stuff. And in the meantime, I had started a coaching business on the side around this idea. I originally started with financial coaching, helping people get their money in order. And then I figured out real quickly that a lot of times it wasn't just money, it was also time. And so I started doing money and productivity, because it turns out a lot of the thinking, a lot of the processes, a lot of the mindsets around those two areas are similar. They're finite resources, how we handle them. So my joke is, you said it at the beginning, I help people master their time, their talent, and their treasures so that they can live out their calling. People come for help with time, or they come for help with money, but we actually only work on talent, because at the end of the day, how you handle your time or how you handle your money, it's all about how you handle yourself. That's really the key. And so that's where all the DISC and all the leadership and all of that came about. Started doing coaching business on the side, left the executive position back in 2017 and launched my own coaching business full time. And I've been doing that as my full-time business ever since.
Yeah. Awesome. So it sounds like you have quite you've done so many various roles. Especially, and which is very fascinating. One thing I will talk about is this idea of DISC and communication. And so tell us what DISC is and how can people use it?
Sure. So, and it shows up in my coaching in that there's a lot of tools out there that we use that people get really frustrated with, because at the end of the day, it's like somebody tells them, this is what works for me. And then they try it and they're like, this doesn't work. And part of that is because we're wired differently. And so, there's a lot of different systems out there. There's Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and DISC and, 50,000 different ones. And they all kind of have the same idea, which is we're wired differently. We're designed and built and wired in a certain way. And how we see the world, how we communicate, how we interact with the world, in part comes through that wiring. None of the systems are perfect. None of the systems, we're more complex than any model could ever give us. But I like DISC because it's a relatively simple model. It's relatively easy to understand. So it's relatively easy to kind of hold in your head. And it gives you a fairly good insight both into ourselves as well as to others, and how we communicate, how we interact, how we see the world. And so real quickly, and I won't go into a ton of detail, but the DISC is DI. All of us are some level of blend of all four of those letters, those types. So you'll see a lot of times that they'll say, oh, I'm a D. Well, usually you're not just a D or just an I or just an S or just a C. You're some blend of all of them. But D may be your dominant type. So, and D actually stands for dominant. So these people are direct. They tend to be results oriented. A lot of physicians have a high D type as at least part of their component. They tend to make decisions quickly. They tend to act very well. And in fact, if you've got a surgeon working on you, you kind of want somebody that does that. You don't want someone that sits around and go, I don't know what we should do. You kind of want them to move and get results and be directed. So it's a good thing. It's usually about 10% of the population. If I walked into a room of 1 million people, roughly 10% of them kind of have that high D component. I is the inspirational folks. These are a party waiting for a place to happen. They tend to look at the world through the lens of fun and engagement and energy, and they're a blast to be around. These are the D's. When they left the home, their parents were like, "Oh, thank goodness we got our home back." When the I's left the home, the parents were like, "Oh, all the fun left. Where did they go? The party left." And that's that kind of personality. And again, none of these are good. None of these are bad. There is no value judgment on it. It's just kind of how we see the world. And again, we're all a blend. So you may have a D and an I. You may be able to act through both of those. S is the supporter. So they tend to be the nicest people on the planet. That's actually also the one that's the most common. So if I have to guess, if I don't know, I usually start talking to someone as if they're an S and then kind of work from there to figure out the rest of it. So supporters tend to be very much about peace and harmony. They like the status quo. They don't like change. They don't like conflict. They don't like loud people. So you'll notice I'm talking a little quieter right now because I'm talking to the S's. They're that kind of personality. Yeah. And then your C, the last one, DISC. The C is the cautious type. They tend to be perfectionist. They tend to be very knowledge driven. They tend to be very much about, rules and steps and procedures and checklists. And again, you see a lot of that show up also in the medical field. All of these could show up, but they'll show up in different blends in different careers and in different things. And then what I realized is because we're wired differently, like for instance, most productivity systems are written for C-type people. Well, if you're not a C-type person, it doesn't work as well for you because you're kind of trying to, it's like you speak German and the system's written in French, and you're kind of trying to apply it in a different way. And so that's kind of where the DISC study showed up in the work that I do around time and money and how I work with people on communication and their understanding.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's like there's so many different tests and assessments and it depends on how it fits into your organization or your employees and how you use it. So it's fascinating. You can take different components to tailor it to your company and your business. So
well, it helps you with both where you're through employees, but also with your clientele. That's one of the reasons that I work with a lot of small business owners on understanding DISC is because, if you're like the leader of your company and you have a particular personality type, but your employees have a different type, if you don't understand how they see the world and how they communicate, then when we're talking to them, again, it's like, I'm yelling at them in German and they're going, I don't speak German. I want to do what you're telling me to do, but I have no idea what you're telling me to do. And yet we don't recognize that because we see the world a certain way. Therefore, everyone must see the world the way I see it, right? I mean, obviously. And yet, obviously, that's not true. So it extends to clients, it extends to family, marriage, all of those things.
Yeah. And a follow-up question is, how can you use DISC to find out just not how to communicate, but understand others so that you can lead others well.
Sure. So it's again, it starts with understanding them. So we all think about, you've heard the golden rule, right? Do unto others as I want them to do unto me. I actually don't like that rule. I like the platinum rule, and the platinum rule is do unto others as they wish to be done upon. So meaning understand others and how they want to see the world and how they want to understand it. So example, I'm a boss, and maybe I'm a high D kind of mentality, which by the way, I do have a high D. And I tend to want to get results and move quickly and make quick decisions. But perhaps one of the people that works in my office is a high S. I need to understand that when I walk into the meeting and start going, okay, let's go, let's go, let's go, and this is what we're going to do, and blah, 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 I'm scaring them. I'm literally frightening them. There's fear inside of them because this feels like conflict. It feels like change. It feels scary. But if I'll slow down and go, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's how this supports the team, here's how we're going to make sure that everyone's taken care of, we're going to make sure that all of the pieces are in place so that nobody's left behind, they're going to be on board 110%, and they're going to be a champion to make whatever initiative you're putting forward happen, because you're speaking to them in the language and addressing their concerns and their worries before they've even expressed them. So it can be tone of voice. You'll notice every time I start talking like I'm talking to an S, I immediately lower my tone of voice. I'm talking a little slower, talking a little calmer, because that's literally what I do. When I'm talking to somebody that I've picked up on the fact that they probably got this S going on. Let me calm down a little bit, because my natural speed is like 110 miles an hour. So I have to very deliberately try to begin to slow down and talk a little calmer, talk a little softer, and that kind of thing. And again, you can do this with all of the components. So, if it's an I type personality, how can you make it fun? How can you make it more engaging? If it's a C, make sure you're giving them all of the information, all of the details, all of the steps, all of the explanation. If it's a D, make sure that you're tying it to results and making sure that they understand how this is going to work in terms of results, not in terms of the how it's going to work. The why, that's a C. More of a this is where you get the results that you're after. This is how it's going to make you look good. This is how you're going to succeed. This is how you're going to win, so to speak. Not necessarily in a competitive way, but this is how it's going to come together for you.
Yeah, very what the other thing is, so you've been what's interesting is I envision you're as a consultant, and you're fulfilling these different roles, based on your experience, especially in education and teaching. So one question that the audience has is, a lot of them, they went through all the footsteps and everything, the hoops, and they come to this end, and they're like, oh, this is not what I want. So how can people identify their calling?
Sure. So there's a process to it. And first off, I want to separate the idea of your assignment from your calling. So an assignment is, what are you doing at this moment? I was a school teacher. That was my assignment at that moment. That's very different than my calling, which my real calling at its root is helping people succeed in their life. That's what jazzes me. That's what, whenever I have that happening, I feel fulfilled. I feel complete. I feel like I'm doing what I was put on this planet to do. Everything lights up. But how I express that can be different in different assignments throughout my life. So I think a lot of times we equate calling with career in terms of what we do. And it's not. It's more of the why behind the what we do. It's the why, not the how. So I think that's important to realize. But in exploring that, it's really kind of it's a multi-part process. So the first part is look backwards. So I actually have an exercise I do with folks where we go through, and there's a lot of questions to it, but I'll kind of touch on it. The basic idea is look backwards and think about all of the things you've done, all of the careers you've had, all of the hobbies you've had, all of the activities you do, and look for the things that you loved Look for the things that you maybe didn't like quite as much, maybe even hated, look for, and you're kind of looking for the patterns in this, because a lot of times what you'll find is, when I was a teacher, here's what I loved about being a teacher, and here's what I didn't love about being a teacher. When I was an executive, here's what I loved about being an executive, here's what I didn't love. And even though they're two very different different roles, different activities, there's still patterns to what I loved and what I didn't love. So that's looking backwards. And then you want to turn and look forwards. And so my favorite question for this is this one. Imagine that you were walking through an airport and you suddenly discovered your plane is delayed. You're going to have about a 4 or 5 hour layover that you weren't expecting. And you're like, well, I'll just go grab a bite to eat and, get a drink and whatever, and just hang out for a little while. And as you walk into the restaurant, a friend of yours that you haven't seen for 5 years says, Christopher, haven't seen you in so long. It's great to see you. And you say, oh, it's great to see you. I didn't expect to run into you here. Do you got a minute? And they're like, well, yeah, I've got a layover, about 5 hours. And you're like, I'm here for 4. Let's sit down and get a bite to eat and catch up, I mean, why not? Right. And you sit down at the table together and your friend looks at you and goes, how have you been? And you look at him and you go, you know what? The last 5 years have been the best 5 years of my life, because your job is to tell me what comes after the word because.
You're asking.
What? Well, I mean, you can do it, but this is part of identifying your calling, is asking that question. So what would come after that word because? So if you're 5 years in the future and this last 5 years have been the best 5 years of your life, why?
I grew my business, helped, thousands of people. You leveraged my gifts, grew, had loving relationships with my family and spouse, healthy.
Mm-hmm. And so as a coach, what I would do now is I would start asking you questions. So like, for instance, you said, I grew my business. What does that mean? What does growing your business look like? Tell me more. Tell me more is my favorite question, right? Tell me more. So basically we'd unpack that and we'd start writing and developing a story and a narrative so deep and so visceral that when you looked at it, it's like you could almost feel that it's real. You could taste it, you could smell it, you could look at it and go, yeah, this is real. Because here's the thing, if you look at those patterns of looking backwards and then looking forward and really dreaming, by the way, most people are really bad at this. We tend to write things that are like, well, I don't know. I kind of hope this maybe will, we tend to be limiting ourselves. I'm really saying open up and dream, and what really would make it where this last 5 years have been the best 5 years ever. And then from that, looking at those patterns, you can usually start to identify what are the things that drive you. And regardless of what career or job or assignment or business or whatever you're doing, they're the things that drive everything you do. And that, to me, is what a real calling is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And, it kind of reminds me this idea where it's like, for example, people, pursue, for example, people go into medicine because, their parents push them into it, and, they're doing it for
a lot.
Yeah. Especially immigrant first generation, or they chase it because of the status or the money. And then you realize you can get the same thing from, public speaking, writing, investing, different things. So it's kind of like the means don't justify the end. So
right. Yeah. If all you're driven by is, like, for instance, money, and I mean, we use that one because a lot of people get it, I want you to, it's not, there's nothing wrong with making money, but if all you're doing is making money to make money, it's kind of like, why? Where if there's a purpose behind it, if there's a mission behind it, if there's a feeling behind an emotion, because otherwise you'll never have enough. I mean, if it's just about money, well, I've got $1 million, now I want 2, I've got 10, now I want 20, there's no end to it.
Yeah.
There's no sense of contentment, and you can be driven and want more and be content at the same time.
Yeah.
Where that's not the same as that sense of loss or sense of, I'm just doing this because, again, I'd hate to go to the doctor who's only a doctor because their mama wanted him to be.
Yeah.
That's, I don't want to go see that doctor. I want to go to the doctor that's a doctor because they feel like this is really how they express who they are.
Yeah.
And that, because that's the doctor that actually cares at a level that goes beyond just the medicine
Yeah.
of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And then this is a really topic about, your calling. And one thing that clients usually talk about is how to transition from a job that you hate to a calling that you love. I know it's a process. Some people can do it in 6 months. Some people take years. What's the best way?
So the first best way to realize is there is no one best way. Seriously, I mean, because I think a lot of times that's actually part of what holds us back is we start thinking about, well, how can I do this in a way that works perfectly? Let me cue you, you can't. Okay, there is no perfect solution. It's a process, not an event. It's about progress, not perfect. This isn't a single one size fits all, everyone does it this way, and that's how it works. So I know people that have gone, cold turkey, jump off the cliff. I quit my job and this is what I'm doing. Don't necessarily recommend that, but I know people that have done that and succeeded. I tend to be more conservative than that. So I want to make sure that there's a little bit of a financial runway and you've got some things in place. But it really comes back to, again, identify where you want to go. Because just like in GPS, if you don't know, GPS works by you type in the destination, it goes and puts a pin on the destination, and then it maps backwards to where you are. We kind of have to do the same thing with our life. We have to kind of go, okay, this is the direction I want to go. This is the destination I'm aiming towards. Probably don't have it fully formed yet. Don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but that direction, I know it's over there. I don't want to be this anymore. I want to move toward, I don't want to be a doctor. I want to move towards opening a coffee shop. I just made something up. I have no idea. But I literally have somebody that did that transition of going from a doctor to running a coffee shop and loves it. Then, okay, what are the things we need to put in place? What is the knowledge we need to have? What is the finances we need to have? What are the tools we need to have? And then let's just start knocking those things down and begin to move towards it. In their case, they did some study, they did some research, they did something, then they actually opened a restaurant and did it on the side. So they were working insane hours, but they did that for like a year. And then it got to the point where it's successful enough. And they're like, okay, now I can quit my other thing and just go do this thing that I love. That's an example. Don't hear that and go, okay, that's what I have to do. That's for some people that works well. So it's really just more about, and this is again, where sometimes working with somebody else can help, because when we're in our own head, we have a tendency we want to know all of the steps and all of the answers before we begin.
Yeah.
And again, part of the truth is you won't, and just say that out loud, recognize you're not going to know all the steps. You're not going to know everything that's going to go wrong. You're not going to know exactly how this journey is going to go. So given that, what do I actually, need to know? What really is the minimum viable product or step, or what's the next action I can take that moves me in that direction? And then it's just a matter of doing that over and over and over again until you end up where you want to go. For some people, it happens fast. For others, it takes a while.
Really interesting conversation. And as we're getting to the end of it, well, one thing is talking about doing the right things and getting the most important things done. Tell us why people have trouble getting. They manage to get not more done, but the right things done.
Right. So a lot of what I teach in productivity, and I'm really deliberate. I use the word productivity, not the word time management, because we talk about time management as if we're managing time, and it's not the time that we're managing, it's ourselves. So a lot of times what we have a tendency to do is we spend a lot of time and energy on doing the things that, well, quite frankly, they scream the loudest. They're the most obvious things to do. Email, right? Probably someone right now listening to this has their email tab open on their computer and they're looking at it going, oh my goodness, I've got, 1,742 unread emails right now. What am I, that kind of thing. Well, we've got to do that. The phone rings. We've got to answer the phone. It's all of those things. So there's actually a matrix called the Eisenhower matrix that some people know. It's think of it as a 4-quadrant, and it's in the upper right-hand corner. It's things that are urgent and important.
Yeah.
A fire alarm going off, urgent, important, right? Need to deal with this, find out why the fire alarm's going off.
Right.
On the other top left side is things that are urgent but not important.
Mm-hmm.
Quite frankly, most telephone calls, most emails fall into that category, right? They feel urgent. They feel like, we need to answer it right now. And yet the reality is, if you answer that email in an hour, nobody cares. If you answer it in 4 hours, probably still don't care. That kind of thing. And then as you go down to the lower right-hand side is things that are important but not urgent.
Mm-hmm.
This is things like, date night with your wife. This is things like having a conversation with your kid. This is things like, it's those things that actually are really important, but they're not screaming that loud. They're easy to say, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. If you have something on your to-do list that has moved to the next day more than 4 times, it's probably in that category.
Yeah.
Okay, it's probably in that category. The lower left is things that are not urgent and not important. This is binging on Netflix and this kind of stuff. Most of us, believe it or not, don't actually have that big of a problem with that category. The not urgent, not important. Yes, some people watch way too much TV or whatever, but most people aren't too bad about that one. It's that urgent, it's the not urgent but important category that most people miss. So a lot of what we need to do is start figuring out a way to schedule, to plan, to put in place. How can we get that stuff done and stop living under the tyranny of things that are urgent but not important? Saying no to those things so that we can say yes to those other things.
Very fascinating discussion and really interesting. Tell us, the audience, how they can find you, follow you, look at your work, visit your website, etc.
Sure, absolutely. So I have a landing page over on my website. If they go to inspiredstewardship.com independence, just /independence, they'll actually find a page just made just for your listeners. On there, there's a little bit of information. If you want some tips on time or some tips on money, there's actually you can sign up and get some tips delivered to your inbox. Same thing for talent. And then there's also a link on there that they can just set up a 30-minute meeting. If anything I've said resonated with you and you'd like to just jump on my calendar, no high pressure. I'm not any of that kind of stuff. We'll just have a chat. And if maybe coaching is something you want to do, we'll talk about what that looks like.
And for all the listeners out there, Scott's resources will be in the links and show notes. Be sure to follow him on social media, as well as check out his free resources. And it was a great discussion. Really enjoyed it. And thanks for coming onto the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I hope you really enjoyed that wonderful, inspirational, motivational piece. Again, wherever you are listening, if you liked it, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. We're on everywhere: Spotify, iTunes, Google, Amazon, Audible. And without much ado, be sure to thank this show's sponsors, and we'll see you next week.